please welcome to the stage our speakers and session chair, Rob Webster.
Hello everybody, my name's Rob Webster. It's nice to see you all here at this penultimate session at the NHS Confederation. I'm joined by an esteemed panel of guests. So I should say I'm the Chief Executive of NHS West Yorkshire, which is an integrated care system in the north of England. It covers about 2.5 million people, and we spend about £5 billion a year with our partners. I'm going to ask each of the panellists to introduce themselves from Steve onwards, and then we're going to have a bit of a conversation today. So that will involve you as well. We're going to have some introductory remarks, 3 to 5 minutes from each panellist, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation up here. But then we really want to have a conversation with you as well, and feel free to be as interesting or contentious as you like in this session. As it's the penultimate session of the whole conference, I think it's important that we are interesting and challenging on what is a very important and I would say essential topic for the future of the health and care system. So let's get down to introductions. So Steve, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name's Steve. I'm the Chief Delivery Officer for NHS England and the National Director for Vaccination and Screening.
Henry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Henry. I'm the Chief Exec of the North East Combined Authority, which represents an area from the bottom of Durham to the Scottish border.
Polly.
Hi, I'm Polly Curtis. I'm Chief Executive of the cross-party think tank Demos.
Nicola.
Hi, I'm Nicola. I'm one of the head teachers at Surrey Square Primary School, which is in Southwark in South East London, and also one of the founders of the Old Kent Road Family Zone.
Fantastic. So I was just being interviewed for the Confed telly, which is streamed live on YouTube, and I was describing where else would you get a panel that includes this breadth of knowledge and experience. And I would also say this is the kind of breadth of knowledge and experience that we need if we're going to address these prevention issues. Now, I'm going to ask each of the panellists to give us some input at the beginning so they can set their stall out. And I think, Steve, you're going first.
Thanks, Rob. It'll get better after me, by the way. So I think this is, Rob, as you say, like one of the really important topics for both the NHS to lean into alongside its partners because of the impact it can have on people.
Yeah.
So in the end, we'll join public service to do good things for people that live in the country. And I joined the NHS because I wanted to try and have the opportunity to influence people's life chances, which was driven largely by my experience of growing up with my brother. And if we are really, really serious about life chances, then thinking about the services that we talk about in the context of prevention is one of the most important ways that I think you can leave a lasting and meaningful change for people's life chances. And that is both about what the NHS can do and also what the NHS can do in support. So one of the things we often talk about is this debate between primary prevention, whose job is primary prevention, whose job is secondary prevention. Prevention is about improving life chances. If you look at what is going to happen in the country, people are going to live much longer, but the point at which ill health starts will be about the same. So people will live for longer, but with poorer health. And to Amanda's speech yesterday on the prams, we know that generation now. We know those people now, and we have a chance to influence their potential life chances. So I think it's really exciting to have this conversation. I spent most of my career in the acute sector. I've spent 2 years working in a public health arena, which, from a kind of personal leadership and mindset perspective, has been really transformational. So I think about things very, very differently. I started to think about things a bit differently when I was at Harrogate, and Rob leads West Yorkshire. And like, I think it is everybody's job to do both things. which sounds a bit motherhood and apple pie to an extent. But actually, rather than us thinking about health and care, life, in the slightly traditional ways that we do, and kind of go urgent care over here, elective care over here, and then let's maybe think about and adding on prevention. Actually, it is all the same in many respects. Final thing I was maybe say is, by way of intro, is I think this, to the question on the title in some ways, the agenda for this conference is different to the agenda it has been. So we've often over the years talked a lot about the acute sector. If you scan across the topics that have been on Confed today, there is much more about prevention and population health. And do you know what? I think it's really exciting. This is a place where energy is available. People care about this, and most people in the NHS like working. They like people.
Yeah.
They like working with people, and you have to do that both with the communities and with partners to achieve this. So I think it's like really exciting.
So I often say that, you know, at its best, the Confed conference helps set the weather.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is the climate we're in. This is what we need to do. So you're describing that, you know, we seem to be in a position where prevention's part of the climate now, and you've had a personal leadership journey, which, as you've said, look, I understand the importance of this, whichever role you're in. So we need everybody to be in that position if we're going to make prevention a priority. So we'll come back to that in a minute, I think, about how that could be possible without everybody having to go on a personal journey. Henry, give us a couple of thoughts.
It could be quite nice to go on a personal journey over the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, why not? Maybe they have to.
So, thanks, Rob. So just try and think about how best to illustrate this, and with a really good local example, which has just popped up at me. So forgive me, this is not exactly what I would have said 20 minutes ago, but the basic point I want to make is about the relationship between prevention and economic progress in our regions. And in effect, it's a version of that health and growth argument, which is well trodden. We all understand two sides of the same coin. You cannot have the things that both of the main parties in the country are saying they want, which is a growing economy which delivers better public services, without thinking about the right kind of social infrastructures to enable that, vice versa. Health is wealth, wealth is health, ... So we in the North East have been through a mayoral election like the other devolved areas of England over the last month or so. And my example is the new mayor, Kim McGuinness, who's been elected in the North East, on a stage yesterday, a little teeny stage with not many people in the room because it's a pre-election period, obviously, but talking about priorities for growth, priorities for the economy. And her response was child poverty prevention. She talked about child poverty levels in the region. They're shocking, they're immediate. You can see them reported every year, and year on year, the levels get higher. But seeing that as a fundamental part of your economic strategy is really, really interesting. And so you start to then get into the bit that devolution can really bring, and mayoral combined authorities can really bring to this discussion, which is about skills, it's about transport, it's about jobs, it's about quality of housing, and bringing those things together in an integrated way. And the thing that I would say and encourage NHS colleagues to start thinking about really is how we much more fundamentally lean into devolution as a construct. It isn't going away. In fact, I think it will be an even more important part of the political landscape in England, as well as Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland over the years. And the extent to which we are able to succeed on some of the dynamics you picked up on rightly, I think will depend on how enthusiastic the NHS is about devolution and how much it leans into it. So that's the basic point that I want to make, and happy to follow up on that in a bit.
So in terms of that, if you look at West Yorkshire, there are 100,000 people who currently work in the health and care system. So if I have a conversation with combined authority and local authority colleagues, one of the things I like to impress upon them is we are the economy. You know, we are part of the economy. That's an investment in jobs and skills, good jobs. And we know that in-work poverty is a problem. We can be part of the solution to that. So for people who think, well, all those things that Henry just talked about there, that's local authority business, isn't it? That's national government business. Unless we see ourselves as part of the economy, never mind the supply chain, you know, major capital programs and other things, then we won't really be able to lean in, I don't think.
Yeah, agree.
Polly, over to you.
So The reason I got very interested in this area of prevention came through writing a book about the children's social care system. And there was one mother I met who, her story really told me so much of what was going wrong in the whole system. She had fairly bad mental health problems that were really impacting on her ability to parent, on her ability to keep her kids safe from a violent partner. These are not unusual stories if you are in the social care world. And ultimately, she couldn't keep her children safe, and both her children were permanently removed. But at the point that her children were permanently removed, she hadn't been offered any mental health treatment beyond some online CBT to support her. And in this kind of prevention story, there's huge amounts of complexity, and there's huge amounts of complexity in this woman's life. But that single fact was true. We had done nothing as a state to support her to stay together with her children before her children were removed. And then you think about that and the wider system of what's going wrong, and how many councils are now facing severe funding challenges because of things like the Children's Social Care Bill. We're spending more and more money removing children before we've done anything to help them really stay together. And so in that complexity versus simplicity, sometimes these simple facts just need to be held onto. If not now, when? Subject to this title. I think that burning platform that we're on is getting worse and worse. We have reduced the state in many areas to doing what it absolutely has to do at the moment of crisis, and none of the help that needs to avoid that crisis. And it's just simply unsustainable. So the case we're making is about, yes, more money across public services, but actually reform needs to go with that. We need to do things very, very differently. And there are just two aspects to that I'll kind of build on now before we get further into the conversation. One is how we think about prevention. So we wrote a paper at Demos called The Preventative State that set out this kind of typology of interventions, from reactive services, which is a lot of what we do at the moment, to interventions once you've identified a problem happening. But the bit we're really interested in is what we call foundational policy, how you get way beyond the problems happening to solving some of the more systemic problems in society around mental health, around loneliness, around the impact of poverty. How do you get way, I never know whether it's upstream or downstream, but to solving the kind of foundational problems that are going wrong out there, because that's really what Clarissa, this mother, what was really happening to her was a combination of poverty, mental health, exacerbated by being very isolated in the world. So that's just kind of one big picture. A lot of this, you use the term motherhood and apple pie, and that's what's so often talked about in these contexts, that I'm almost like considering becoming a champion for motherhood and apple pie, because it's usually just the right thing. And yes, life is more complicated than that, but why don't we focus on doing the right thing? But beyond all the complex responses that need to happen at a local level in partnership between all the agencies to start to solve those foundational problems, there are some core centralised problems that come from the top down that hold everyone back from doing the right thing. And one of them is just how we fund public services. So one very specific, not very motherhood pie-ish intervention we've been calling for is for the Treasury to be fundamentally rewired to prioritise, measure and fund preventative work. So at the moment, departments are given capital spending and revenue spending. We think that if you actually marked out within that spending lines what prevention is, you would start to A, understand what prevention is, B, start to be able to measure how you shift from reactive spending to preventative spending and start to be kind of truly transformational about how you do prevention. And we're working with the Health Foundation at the moment to design how that would work in detail, because if they can't see it, they can't value it, and that needs to be really fundamentally shifted from the centre. I think I'll stop there for now.
No, thank you for those powerful points. I mean, the points about loneliness are really well made. It may be striking for some people, but loneliness isn't just an issue for grown-ups and adults. You know, a substantial proportion of children report being lonely. And in West Yorkshire, we did a piece of work prior to the pandemic about how do we tackle loneliness and isolation, because it's as damaging for people as illness. And what we found was that when you talk to people, we did a bit of research with Leeds Beckett, I think it was, people wanted to be a good neighbour. They weren't interested in civic pride and stuff. They just wanted someone to be a good neighbour, take the bins out, come and say hello, check if you got your mail, that kind of thing. And we worked with, we put money that was meant for urgent care and put it into tackling loneliness through the third sector. And the things that they did with the money was amazing.
What did they do?
Well, they funded organisations to work with local people to make sure that people were connected and supported, to be good neighbours, because actually sometimes what people want is just to get over the first awkwardness of, is it okay to go around and see Joan next door and check she's okay? Or will somebody say that's the wrong thing to do, or I've never met her before? So they put in place all sorts of interventions which would help people to do those sorts of things.
It's such an interesting example of where the state, rather than doing two communities, can lean in to support the capital that exists and just liberate that to happen.
Yeah. So I think what we might come back to in a minute is how do you measure what you've prevented, which is the classic Treasury and ICS problem in some ways. But let's talk about an area which is all about primary prevention, I think. Nicola.
Yeah, so I'm a head teacher of a primary school, as I said, in Southwark, and we work as part of a wider education trust. And the mission in that trust is to rethink school. So really understanding that the school in its traditional sense is not what we need now. And so I've worked at my school now for 18 years, and the life's work there has to be to model what we really believe and bring to life what we really believe schools should be like now. We serve a really social, economic, diverse and disadvantaged community. 85% of our families sit within the highest deprivation band on the Adaki index. 25% live within temporary accommodation, and lots of that accommodation you would not want to put an animal in. I mean, it's in such awful disrepair. And around 8% of our school community have no recourse to public funds. So we deal with a lot of challenge, and our children come to school already facing a lot of challenge. Around 25% of children come to us on track when they're in nursery, so at the standard that they should be. By the time they leave us, that's about 85% are on track. And people always go, wow, how do you do it? Are you an exam factory? And it's like, no, we are the antithesis to an exam factory. So we call ourselves more than a school. We're more than a school because we go way beyond what the traditional model looks like. And we put well-being at the heart of the work that we do. Well-being is absolutely critical. You could have the best curriculum offer in the world, but if a child is not okay, if they're hungry, if they're lonely, whatever's going on for them, if that's not addressed, they're never going to be able to achieve their full potential. So we have a really comprehensive and universal well-being offer. And then obviously we're supported by specialist intervention as well, where we're not able to, we need more specialist help. And we do that because, again, we see time on time what a difference that makes. Now, children live within families, what we said, and so family well-being for us is absolutely critical as well, and we invest heavily in that. We have a family worker that works with families around immigration, financial insecurity, domestic violence, anything that families need support with, we will support them with. And again, people will say, that's not your job, and it's like, it is our job because it's affecting our children, so we have to make that work. Before COVID, but really COVID shone a light on it, we really felt like community well-being needed addressing because our families live within communities. So if communities are not in a good state, that's going to have an impact going up the chain. And having worked in the community for 18 years, it's fascinating and sad, really, that our community hasn't really changed. Despite massive investment, despite lots of great work that goes on, lots of the challenges our community faces are still the same. And what we see, I love your phrase, because I say it all the time, is our community is constantly done to. People think they know what the answers are. They pull on, I always say this, they pull on their superhero capes, pants over their trousers, zoom in to save the day with all best of intention, but it's not working. There is great work that happens, but it happens in silos. People are competitive. It's like everyone's going for the same bit of funding and don't really want to tell you what they're doing. So there's lots of work that happens in silos, which isn't helpful. And also there's really low expectation of our community. When I first said where my school was, anyone that was brought up in this country probably their brain will have gone to Monopoly board, and you will all have your preconceptions of where I work because of that brown square on the Monopoly board. And that again is what my children contend with, and that really isn't the reality. So we were like, we've got to do something about this. So what do we need to do? We need to do things differently with our community. We need to do with our community. And what does do with really look like? Starts with celebrating the amazingness that is within our community, shining a light on it. Then it's about believing that the answers to the problems the community are facing are within the community itself. If we just give them the power, give them the voice, give them the autonomy, they know what is right. So it's about, for us, the zone work is now about creating the conditions for people to thrive. It's about relationships being the precondition to meaningful work. We do that with children, we do that with our staff, we do it with the community as well. And it's a mindset shift because it's believing the answers are there. So it's about how do we unlock capacity that's here and how do we build capacity that's here. So in 2020 we started with a blank piece of paper and lots of enthusiasm. And where have we got to? So we now have a community board which is made up of about 18 different either individuals, parents, or local community organisations. And that community board, they're all volunteers, and their job is to listen in the community and bring that listening back to the group. And then we go through a process of listening to each other and then unpicking the root causes to the issues people are facing. So crime comes up, we need more police. It's like, no, let's unpick that. What's at the heart of this problem? And then we say, right, okay, once we've got to the nub of the problem, which often is isolation, loneliness, poor mental health, feeling like lack of belonging, what can we do about it? And support the community to come up with solutions. Then support those solutions to come alive. We experience those together, we reflect on them, we look at where can we improve them, and we keep going around that cycle. One of those initiatives has been a marketplace. So in one of our very first meetings, somebody said, what we really need is for the school to be open at the weekend. And somebody else said, well, that will never happen. Schools are closed at weekends. And I said, so what would you want it to look like if it did? And fast forward from the first time we opened the school on a Saturday where there were 40 people and we were all a bit scared that no one would turn up, to today where we have about 350 people come through the gates, many of whom I don't know because they come from across the community. We're able to offer lots of different services, sports coaching, there's food, there's clothing, the library comes. We partner with the NHS, so we have NHS come, they are able to offer health checks, vaccinations, able to offer to signpost people to different organisations as well. We've picked up loads of health issues through this that were underlying or people didn't realise that they had. But more than anything, it's giving people joy. It's offering employment opportunities to our local community and volunteering opportunities. And so the point here is that when we ask the community, when we listen to them, the answers are there. And then through partnership and collaboration, we're able to start to create the conditions for people to thrive. And somebody said to me, gosh, Nicola, it's a big job you're trying to do there, improve the community of your whole community. And somebody else said, you know what, look at it as you're trying to change people's lives one person at a time. Because if you do that, then it starts, the domino effect starts. And we've got many, many examples of people's lives that have changed and the impact that that's having on them, their families, their wider community. And so for us, this is the way forward. This is the way that we're going to be addressing those complex issues.
That's fantastic. It sounds incredible work, down to some fantastic leadership. I mean, what I'm hearing is we've got an asset-based community approach to the world. We need some national thinking around what we're funding and why in public services, and what do we want to incentivise. We've got to lean into devolution, and we've got to have leadership that sees prevention as essential. Now, I think if I asked everybody in the room, would you agree with that? They'd all say, well, yeah, that all sounds right. That probably all sounds right. So why doesn't it happen? You know, being right isn't enough. We know that from all sorts of research and things that are obvious to us. Motherhood and apple pie. Well, both of those are quite nice things, aren't they?
Yeah.
But what each of you, somebody tell me why isn't it happening now? You know, what's stopping it?
I'd say change is hard.
Right.
Change is really, really hard, and there are much bigger risks or perceived risks in working in this way. And I would say it's the legacy of a public service system driven by a new public management mindset, which was all about kind of measurement, markets, managerialism. And this is about letting go and trusting that it will work. So I think change is hard. It's a big shift in the mindset across the system. But also, what I've also heard in a lot of this is it's about the kind of trust in the relationships between the school and its community, I've just come from the event next door, which was all about Martha's Rule, which is fundamentally about partnerships between patients and families and medics. And we did the policy underpinning work with Martha's family around that. It's about broken relationships in hospital. And if you'll forgive me for maybe getting a little bit political, it's the theme of this election is all about trust between politicians and communities. And I think at every level at the moment, I saw it in children's social care. There's parts of the country where the term social worker is the barrier to the state helping anyone. Not everywhere, but in some places. So I think it's like that trust, and it's not just people trusting authorities and the state. It's about authorities and the state trusting people again.
Yeah. So there's one of the phrases I stole years ago is, we're a guest in people's lives, but we just think of things as they're a guest in our institutions. They have to follow our rules. That just undercuts all of the assets that they bring to the conversation, all the potential, and we have to have that mindset. But we don't potentially have that leadership mindset. But I would argue that the Messenger review said that that's what we should have in many ways. So I think there's definitely something within the climate, if we want to return to that metaphor, which is about this type of leadership. And we know that progress moves at the speed of trust and can be amplified by good policy and good incentives and funding and everything else. So we need to get to that position. Steve, you've been responsible for the vaccination programme. We know that some communities don't trust the vaccination programme. What do you think we can do for things like vaccination, which is great for prevention, to build trust in communities and make sure we get to as many people as possible?
Yeah. So, shameless quick plug. Second most effective public health intervention, only to clean water. So the NHS and its partners do prevention. We don't do enough, but it is there. So, the strategy has got three parts to it, but the thing that always sticks with me, Cordell, who's a public health consultant, director of public health from this part of the world, she was really clear about her perspective on the strategy, which was there are a group of people, no matter how you organise services, who will always come forward or always find a way to get something that they're offered. And you could rearrange the deck chairs in many different ways. You might make it a bit better, but they would still come and get. So people like me, I would still find my way to prevent future ill health. What the strategy is really trying to get at is people who are poorly served by the NHS, and people who have not necessarily trusted us enough or had the right set of support around them in a way that makes sense for them and their lives, to take up an offer of vaccination. And she said, the test of this will be in X years' time, whether people that we have never protected before from ill health become protected.
Yeah.
And the way you do that is, on the one hand, complicated, but actually also just really simple. And it is exactly the stuff that you were talking about. So you meet people where they are, not where you would like them to be. We all love the NHS brand. Actually, services being delivered in facilities that look like that don't look like a government-owned fancy sort of building, but are the buildings where people go for support. That is how you do it. And the other thing that you do is we don't try and NHSize something that doesn't need to be, but instead should be invested in. So voluntary and community sector, the NHS has I think the NHS has treated that really important sector with actually a bit of disdain over the years, and we engage with them when it suits us. It's like, oh, could you run a campaign or something? Yeah. Actually, that is the group of people. Those are the people in communities who know their communities, know what they need, know what they will trust, and what I think we should be doing, again, what the strategy tries to do, is to say those are the things that we should be investing in, rather than trying to recreate it in something that looks more classical NHS. Just use what exists and works.
Yeah. So that's very consistent with the kind of things that we saw during COVID, isn't it? So I think Bradford, we had the first vaccine clinic in a curry house, for example, and if we recognise and don't argue that people will not be confident in the vaccine from different communities for really, understandable reasons from the experiences of people previously, then we can work with them to build trust and confidence. If we talk about people being hesitant, it's their fault. Well, you've got to use the right language. But I was really struck by what Nicola said about by putting services where people come on a Saturday. Suddenly you're signposting people to a load of things, you're identifying health issues that wouldn't have been identified otherwise. So any tips, Nicola, on how do you get really good leadership and opportunities like in Old Kent Road, which are then supported by the NHS, to be deployed more broadly? How does it not just be something that's great in the Old Kent Road? How do we make it something that's good everywhere?
Yeah, so we've worked to create a leadership programme for community leaders and school leaders to be able to exactly that challenge mindset and help people to change their mindset, and had started to work with our local integrated care board to talk about how we might collaborate on that. So it's totally possible, and I think the sort of the work it's about the way of working with people that's the model, not what the outputs are. So the different projects that we have, other communities may not want those. They may not be the right answers. So that's the critical bit. It's using the model to activate the communities, which sounds really simple, but it does. We all go into these sort of vocational professions to help people, and often helping people can be fixing something, and I think it's rebranding the kind of what does it mean to help people. Helping people now, I truly believe is this unlocking and building their capacity. Ultimately, that's what's going to enable them to flourish and thrive, which is what we want for them.
Yeah, so there is something, I think, at the foundation of current policy, which is to have integrated care systems, which through the third sector, the NHS and local government look at mental, physical and social issues for people in their communities and get people to work together to meet them. This should be bread and butter to us, shouldn't it? It should be the thing that we all say, well, yeah, obviously we're all doing that because that's what integrated care systems are for. They are a novel construct which is here to deliver those issues. They're not cheap performance management of NHS trusts.
But there's something really, as a leader, you have to take your own ego out of it. It's not about you, and I think again that can often be very, very difficult. When people come into our community board, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're the head of the council or who. Everybody has an equal voice, and that's so hard for people to kind of actually actually live. People often go, oh yeah, it sounds great, and then the reality of it is, oh no, actually I want, and it's like, no, that's the lived reality. So I think it sounds really simple, and I think in reality it's quite hard to do, because it needs a lot of self-awareness and reflection on yourself.
I think that's a really powerful point. One of the things let's just do a test with the audience. I think if I said one of the behaviours that we've got in West Yorkshire is that we suspend our ego in service of each other and in service of others. Can you all think of somebody who would find that very difficult in your team? People are smiling now, aren't they, including the panel. If you were really honest with yourself, would you recognise that sometimes that's you? So this is tough.
It is.
This is tough stuff that we're dealing with here. Sorry, Polly, did you want to come in then?
I've forgotten. Sorry.
Sorry. Do you want to come in and talk?
Just on that point, I mean, it's a totally spot on discussion, isn't it? But so I was just thinking about the politicians that I work with. And I'm not making a political point here, I promise, and I'm on telly and and I'm a public servant and all that. But, mayors get elected and they have egos. It is a thing. All politicians do. I suppose sometimes it's about how you use that positively, isn't it? Because as you're talking, I'm thinking about, well, what am I really saying that the value add of devolution is here? Well, it's partly about join up. It's about joining up budgets. It's all of that. But sometimes it's about having the opportunity of a bit of brave political leadership that can provide some air cover for that. So the use of a political ego to go, nah, we're going to do something different here, and I'm going to help to create the space to do it is a positive use of ego in that situation.
That's different though, isn't it? That's a different use of ego, rather than going, right, I know what the answers are.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But we need to encourage that, completely.
Yeah, I think that point about the answers in communities, we need to work with them and recognise their strengths. I mean, it's probably, we know some of our most inspiring and resourceful people are in some of our poorest communities, because they have to be.
I think there's a kind of another kind of compassionate kind of understanding of how leadership can hold it back as well, which is that people feel a huge sense of responsibility, and part of this is about saying that you can't fix everything, and also that you are letting go of some of your power to places where it's going to be really hard to be accountable for it. And if you're responsible, if your name is, you're on the hook for something. And I think it's like taking a more compassionate view of like, that's hard to square.
Yeah, I think, so this sounds really cheesy, so apologies for those who find this cheesy. Dean Royals, who used to be the chief exec of NHS Employers, talked once about power. People think power's like money. So you give power away and you lose it. And he says power's not like money, it's like love. If you give power away, you get more. So you're increasing power all the time in the system. So how do we move to a position where people recognise that and are comfortable in retaining accountability, but letting other people get on with it? It's a very scary leadership place to be in.
And it's just one of those things, I think, once you do it, you get such joy from it, and you see it doing exactly what you wanted to do. It's like, I keep going back to trust the process, Nicola, and as you see somebody else step into their light, you just think, yes, that's it, it's happening again. So I think there's something about being brave, going and having all those feelings and kind of, and then once you start to see it working, that's what gives you momentum to keep going in that way.
There's a good sense of the ego there as well, though, because it is about being brave, and actually that's maybe the leadership characteristic that's needed, and people feel quite good about being brave.
Choosing courage over comfort is a difficult thing, but it's essential for all of us. So we're talking about joy at work here, which is very strange for an NHS conference, isn't it? Before people watching or in the audience think we're just here thinking everyone has to get on with each other and it's all about giving other people power and authority, and it all sounds very potentially happy clappy to some people. There's a hard edge to this as well, though, isn't there? You've talked about taking risks, giving people power, giving people authority to get on with things. We talked about the Treasury and others incentivising this work, and it being essential to do so. Henry, do you want to talk a bit about, with Metro Mayors, with devolution, what kind of practical steps should we be putting in place to make sure that this is the priority that we need to see as?
So I think there's a few, but to be brief, you you talked about Treasury and you talked about orthodoxy in the way we account for public spending, the way we think about that in terms of, that classic Dell and Amy, balance of what's managed, what isn't, what's reactive, what's proactive. And I can't see a better way in front of us at the moment, or a better opportunity actually to build on what we're starting to do through Greater Manchester, through West Midlands, through the North East in their Trailblazer devolution deals, which start to experiment with single funding pots. So it starts with transport and skills and housing, and in a few years we'll be in a place where that feels more, what's the word, fungible. So we can start to think about funding, making sure people can get to college as a skills or a human capital issue rather than a transport issue, etc. And the more you get into that space, the more it becomes obvious that needs to bleed into the way that we support services to the public and with the public. And I think it's the only way really you're going to be able to make sure that some of the work we've heard about that Nicola's talking about is not constantly rubbing up against a funding model which pays you on the basis of bums on seats. And so I think keeping the faith on those early Devo experiments and the journey towards a sort of single pot mentality from the Treasury side is really, really important. It's a technical answer, but I think it's the counterpart to some of what we've just talked about.
Nothing wrong with having technical things in place in the infrastructure which will make things happen. And Polly talked about the Health Foundation work on what do you measure, which sounds necessary and essential. And we are practical people, give us a plan and we'll deliver it. I think what we're asking is that gets delivered in a very different way in terms of how we realise the assets that we've got in front of us.
I think one of the challenges in that is that there are areas of this country that are, and local authorities, even in the current times, who are working in this way, and real trailblazers in this way, and they've done it through kind of cultural leadership and actually having a vision of a different way of working and embedding that through what they do. And the problem is sometimes we're trying to fix cultural problems with policy solutions, and what's the interplay between those things, and how do you change institutions' mindsets like you've done in the school to work in a completely different way. And so there's a kind of yin and yang to it, but actually storytelling, telling the story of your school, telling the story of how things are working in the combined authorities actually is part of the inspiration to make that change happen.
Yeah. And Steve started there, didn't he, with, I'm here to advocate for this work because it's essential and necessary as a national director. And we have to make sure that everybody understands that it is their business. The more you get into this, the more mindsets change, I think. If you want to change people's behaviour, you have to change their mind. In West Yorkshire, one of the trusts, the coup, was concerned about how many people turn up in an ambulance. And she thought, well, who are these people? Who is it that keeps turning up in an ambulance all the time? And so she talked to the ambulance service and us about, can we have some data? But they looked at their own data, showed that 60% of people who turned up were from the 2 lowest deciles of deprivation, and 80% of them didn't need any follow-up care. They were taken to the hospital and sent home again. She then said, well, that's who's coming, who's ringing the ambulance service. So we looked at who's ringing the ambulance service, even worse. So it's disproportionately poor people. And then we said, well, who are they? Is it older people who are falling over and need a bit of support, or who are lonely? It's not. It's disproportionately women with children living in damp houses. So how do you solve the problem of A&E? You have to start to have decent housing and transport links. And once you start to think in those terms, it becomes obvious. That's the way you should be thinking, I think. So having a culture and infrastructure that supports that is essential. Steve?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more with that. And the point about trust, risk, it reminds me of something that I had the privilege to see, which I think it speaks to all of this. So it's in Somerset, it's open mental health, and it is their front door for people who need support. And if you track, so your mindset point, so what had been happening was, demand was going up, capacity was constrained, so thresholds were rising. The solution was we raise the level at which we will offer support. So your point about where do you retreat to? And the ICB have done something really brave, as has the Trust actually. So they have commissioned open mental health, It is led by a consortium of the voluntary sector. They are the lead. They've got loads of people with lived experience who advise and make decisions on the sort of services that should be offered. And one of the reasons it's called open mental health is there are no criteria. There is no wrong door. And the trust have embedded their teams into the service. And when you talk to the nurses, they were really worried. Really worried. They thought they were going to be inundated. They were really anxious about risk. And it's probably a year on or something. They describe a complete transformation in how they think about it. So you can't tell who works for who either, which is another brilliant thing. And none of their fears have been realised. But they've also learned a load of different skills. So they've learned so much. They talk about the social prescribers, the communities, the community sectors, and we met two of the people who'd been supported by it, and their experience was incredible. And they, to your point on data, they spotted a pattern with younger men, and so they, based on what people wanted to do, they set up a music club. They set up a gardening club for some other people who particularly want, and people's lives and well-being in their lives have really been touched. Yeah. So I think your point about storytelling is this exists. It's not starting from a place of there is nothing happening. We don't do it at scale as much, and of course there's some national stuff that needs to happen. But there's also huge energy, and in places where you work with your community, you go where the energy is, you can do quite a lot.
Yeah. So we've got about 15 minutes for questions, so it'd be good to get some questions from the audience. The lights are quite bright here, but if I do that, I think I can see the audience. Who's got a question for the panel? All right, so we've got a gentleman in the middle and then further towards the front. So let's start with those two.
Hi, Steve Woods, Head of Strategy for Cheshire and Merseyside ICB. I just want to thank Rob, because we've nicked a lot of West Yorkshire stuff, so thanks for that. My point is we've won the battle, I think, in terms of prevention and the whole, I'll use the word shift left. I know we're not supposed to use that, but that's some of the terminology, isn't it? We've won the battle. It's in our HCP, it's in our NHS delivery plan, it's in our wider joint forward plan. I suppose my concern comes back to, was it Polly? And that thing around the central discussion around spending review. Because, as I said, we've won the battle. It's how can we practically switch some of that investment? So you've answered the question in part. I was keen from Rob as to how perhaps you might have done some of that in West Yorks. And again, we'll nick some of it. It was, for me, it's more about how do we make this switch? How do we switch that investment, particularly given the current financial climate?
Okay, let's take the next one as well, and if there's a third, we'll do three. There's a lady at the back, towards the back, and a gentleman down the front in the middle. Oh. So we'll take them in a slightly different order. We will come to you in a minute, don't worry.
Hi, thank you. I'm Sophie Blow, Clinical and Operational Lead for Perioptim Medicine and Leeds. It's actually a question for Nicola. I hope I got it. What you're doing in schools sounds fantastic. We're trying to do something similar in a different community location. I was just wondering, are you using metrics or outcome measures to demonstrate the impact you're having on your community? And whether we could steal some of those.
Thank you. And let's take this gentleman here, if you want to put your hand up again so that people in the mic can find you.
Hi, I'm Chris Robson. I'm the CEO and founder of digital health company Living With. Firstly, thank you to you all. It's been a fascinating panel conversation so far. As an entrepreneur, the thing that I have to spend most of my time thinking about is what don't I do, as opposed to what do I do. And as somebody who works, who isn't a clinician by background, but has worked in innovation for 25 years, the thing that I often see listening to kind of public sector organizations is a desire to do new things. And the thing that always amazes me and yet horrifies me is how much the public sector is always trying to do, and the NHS in particular, is always adding new things it wants to achieve, new outcomes it wants to achieve. But I very rarely hear how are they going to turn something off or stop doing something in order to facilitate doing something else. So I'd kind of be interested in, again, to the previous one of the previous questions, in terms of implementation, how do you realistically make this work? Because you know, so much of it makes sense.
Yeah, great stuff. That's really helpful. So there's Henry, you want to go first on maybe on the consolidation, prioritisation, and
yeah,
money.
I'm not sure I can do that great question much justice, but I'll give it a go. I think it. So I suppose my response to this is a bit hammy. I'm going to characterise a bit and be devil's advocate a bit, but often the view from outside of NHS world, and in particular I'm thinking about local government, local voluntary sector, for example, is that periodically the NHS realises that prevention is a thing, puts it in a plan, identifies some budget and decides the answer is to commission new services itself, rather than, I would say, embracing the need to collaborate like you mean it to do prevention well, because frankly the levers for most of that come from, as we've heard today, other parts of either the community, place or other agencies. So I would agree with part of the premise actually of your question, actually, which is that doing prevention well might in some cases mean the NHS or parts of the NHS system formally do much less. I think talking about prevention as a positive component of an NHS strategy is great, but if that is simultaneously accompanied by, in effect, the defunding of local government services to the extent that we can't run youth services, we've got no functioning libraries and the leisure centres are crap, well, what are we really doing there? You know, we're just undermining ourselves from day one. So you are quite right. I think the answer is in how well NHS world can collaborate with others to make this happen, not about its own sort of service levels or service provision.
Anybody else want to come in on this point and pick up the point about how do you shift the money?
How do you shift this?
Money.
The money. So on the money and how you design that very technical measurement of preventative spending, we're doing that work at the moment, but I would say the key thing about it is making it longer term. At the moment, our short spending thinking is too short term to tackle some of these really systemic problems. I think there's a huge role for how we use data to track impact in a very different way to how we've been following kind of the impact of spending, particularly where one of the problems is the preventative measure might save spending in another part of the silo, and so how do you track it? There's a lot of potential to solve some of those issues through data. But I would also say on that, we're not going to come up with a perfect system, but that's not a reason not to do it, because at the moment it's a very, very imperfect system.
Yeah.
But can I come in on the why do we stop doing things?
Yeah, sure.
Because I would just say there are huge swathes of the state that have stopped in my lifetime. Libraries, SEN diagnoses, mental health services for people who need them. I think it has happened in a salami slicing way, which has seen thresholds for interventions raise and raise and raise across it. So I think we have stopped doing so much. We stopped solving homelessness where I live in the last 10 years. So a huge amount has stopped. It's just not happened in a strategic, thought out. We haven't, as a country, really discussed where the limits of the state are and what the responsibilities and what we expect from the state anymore. And you see that in how the silos, like we all talk about silos being a bad thing. At the moment, they are spontaneously breaking down. So social workers are picking up mental health work, and schools are picking up social work, and hospitals are picking up everything right at the end of the line. And employers, the private sector is picking up. I was talking to a major employer the other day who is now paying for cancer diagnoses for everyone because it makes economic sense not to have their staff in that situation. you know, it is breaking down spontaneously at the moment. So I'd say we definitely have stopped doing things. We just haven't talked about it properly.
So I do think that planful point is really important. I think in defence of my mental health colleagues,
Yes.
I would say that there is more mental health provision in the country now than ever. There are new services for perinatal mental health that didn't exist before. There are new services around every A&E having a psychiatric liaison. There's all sorts of new stuff, but the gap between demand and supply is a massive problem, particularly post-pandemic. And we need to do something about that. We need to recognise that and do something about that. My own two penneth on the prioritisation point is we've got to accept some responsibility and get out of a dependency culture. So I have lost track of the number of times people have said to me, oh, the NHS England are only interested in these 7 national targets or an equivalent statement. I said, good. Good. Well, you ask them to focus on a small number of targets and the rest of the stuff we can get on with in our local context. That's a good thing. So we need to be part of this sense of what is it that we need to be delivering for our local populations with really good local political leadership which supports that. Do you want to say something, Nicola, about what you're measuring now? How are you making sure that you can see that this is fundamentally making a difference?
The big question, absolutely. So, yeah, we do look at impact data. We do a lot of work around stories and people telling their stories as a part of that. We're part of we've just started a 2-year developmental evaluation, which will give us some more information as well. But obviously, it's tricky to gather that impact data. At school, we actually work with an organisation, so we collect wellbeing data for every pupil every term in the same way we would collect that academic data. So that we're able there to see, what's working, what's not, where children may need more intervention, etc., etc. So, yeah, we're creative, I would say. There are some sort of traditional methods, and then there are some more, kind of personal ways of collecting that information. And again, I've learned that don't discount the stories. They're so powerful. It's not always the numbers that tell the story.
Yeah, so plural of anecdote is qualitative evidence, isn't it? That's what you're starting to get into. How do you collect those? We've got about 4 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask each of the panel members in this interesting political period, without being political, what's your one big hope for the next year on the prevention agenda? So let's start with you, Nicola. What would you wish for?
For me, it's about collaboration. When you said what you were talking about, it's about the fact that none of us have the answers, but we can do it together. And I think, seeing schools as being able to ensure that the little people that leave us are in the best possible state they are is a massive piece of the prevention, which means that actually schools need to be rethinking about what we're measuring in schools, not just the academic outcomes, but ensuring that there's a level of happiness that children have and a level of stability that they have.
So an understanding that an investment in children is a lifelong investment.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. Polly?
There's definitely a political moment to grasp here. Reading the manifesto that came out today, it's the word prevention is all the way through it. And there is also a lot about kind of rebuilding trust at a political level as well. So I think there is a lot that can be modelled from the top around this as well, about how the centre can trust the public servants across the country to deliver this kind of change. But it needs that story and that vision from the centre as well to show people what is meant by it.
Yeah, great, thank you. Henry?
More devolution.
More devolution on health
across the board.
Prevention across the board. More power to local communities.
Why not take an issue? Why not give us a good reason why it's not devolved? Welfare, education, skills, housing, health. Default presumption that we need to build on devolution and do it on purpose now.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
So I think it would be great in a year if we have got a stronger level of join-up across the highest levels of government. That's a sort of necessary and insufficient thing in some ways. But we talk about join-up a lot. And you can have really good join up, and a place in a neighbourhood, an ICB, it can be disabled if there isn't join up across some of the standard success and policy setting areas. And this probably won't be in a time horizon of a year, but I would love us to be in a place where we're not talking about prevention, because it is embedded into the things that we do. Rather than something that we constantly have to say we need to do more on this, which is right, but also success for me is that becomes the day job for everybody. Yeah. It is part of our being, as it were.
So I think in the conference over the last couple of days, there's been big themes around hope and how do we look into the medium term and the future. And I think what the panel have talked about today is if we were able to describe a future for public services which built trust between people and the state, built trust between different actors in public service, which was focused on prevention and those foundational issues, then we start to get into a position where we could hope the whole system could be more successful. And actually, we would be able to find joy in what we do every day. And I think working in the NHS, you can find joy really easily in the work that you do because of the difference that we make to people. So it's a big ask, but I think everybody's said that it's probably within our grasp. But it probably starts with us. So how are we collectively taking this and recognising that prevention is necessary? It's not sufficient on its own, but it's necessary, it's essential, it's part of everything that we do. And that with a policy environment in the health and care system, which said integrated care systems of the NHS, the third sector, our communities are it, with successful providers collaborating together to meet the needs of people, then it should be more straightforward than it would be otherwise. So it's going to be really easy, and you can all leave here feeling really positive about the future. It's going to be really difficult, but we have to do it. Can we all just thank our panellists for their honesty, candour, and inspiration? I think I'm handing over now to the final session of the conference, and so I will depart the stage with my colleagues and wish you well. Thank you very much.